Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So we are talking about the different wordings that can be used for a divorce. And in the previous hadith of Amrah bint al-Jawn, the Prophet told her to go and join your family. And we said here it does not mean that you can simply visit your family. Rather, this is a divorce because we have the context in which this statement took place, which is telling us that this is in fact a divorce because Amrah bint al-Jawn sought refuge in Allah from the Prophet. So the point is, if the husband pronounces divorce in words which are clear-cut, for example, he says, "You are divorced," then it does not matter about the intention. She is divorced. So as long as he pronounces these clear-cut words and he knows what they mean, then it will do him no good to say, "But I did not intend divorce." Because if we open up that door and we allowed him to say, "I did not intend divorce," then every man can simply pronounce a divorce. He's going to regret it afterwards, and he'll then simply say, "Oh, but I did not intend the divorce." So we cut off this route from the very first place and we say, no, if the wording is clear-cut, then your intention does not even come into play. The point is this: you intended to use these words, that's the first condition met, and the second condition, you knew what these words mean. So if both of these conditions are met, then the divorce has to take place, and your intention has got nothing to do with it. As for the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, then yes, this is a general rule, but there are exceptions. And this is one of them. However, there are some scholars who say that if the man utters these clear wordings of divorce, but these were words which just ran off his tongue, he did not intend the divorce per se, then in this case the divorce does not count. And the way they argue is that they say that Allah Jalla wa Ala says about taking the oath, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان. That Allah will not take you to account for those oaths which you take which just run off your tongue, like a person saying La Wallahi, and it just runs off his tongue. So He will not take you to account for these types of oaths, rather He will take you to account for those oaths which you have firmly intended. So they say that a person utters the words of an oath when he says Wallahi, but he does not intend the oath per se. These are just words which he is accustomed to uttering, and you find this with many people. After every other thing they say, it always is followed by Wallahi. So the point is they say it without actually thinking. And they certainly don't intend an oath. So Allah is saying here that He will not take into account for these words which just flow off the tongue, and you haven't actually intended it firmly in your heart. So they say, if this is the case with the oath, and the oath happens when you actually utter the words of the oath, but because you did not intend it, then this oath is not put into effect, so you're not taken into account. Well, then the divorce is the same thing. The divorce is put into effect after you utter the words, but the point is you did not intend the actual divorce per se. These words of divorce were simply something which ran off the tongue. And so Allah cannot take you to account for this, and so they are ineffective, just like the oath. So they argue then that the intention does count, because it does count in the oath, and so by way of analogy, because both the divorce and the oath take place after you utter the words, so by way of analogy, the intention also needs to count with the divorce. Well, this seems to be a powerful argument, but the scholars opposing this opinion, they will reply back by saying, but there is a difference between an oath and a divorce. When it comes to an oath, then this is a contract between you and Allah Jalla wa Ala, and Allah can forgive these oaths which you take which just run off the tongue and you didn't intend it. But as for a divorce, then this is the relationship between you and another human being, not between you and Allah. You are not divorcing Allah, you are divorcing another human being. So what we find is when Allah has rights over you, then these rights are based upon forgiveness. But when it comes to human rights over you, then these are not based upon forgiveness, rather the situation all of a sudden becomes much more severe and less forgiving. Therefore, you uttering clear words of divorce, as long as you intended the words and you knew what they meant, then this would be a divorce, and it will be counted against you. So these are two opinions you have heard, and you've heard the reasons behind them, and Allah Jalla wa Ala knows best. What about this example? A person says to his wife, "Anti taliq," which means you are divorced. And we have to use the Arabic here, you'll see why. And so the woman therefore says, okay, I'm divorced, so I'm no longer your wife. But then the man says, no, what I meant by taliq is that you are set free, because taliq means somebody who is set free as opposed to somebody who is restricted or chained up. So when you're chained up, for example, in fetters, then you are muqayyad, you are restricted or chained up. Opposite to that is taliq, when you are set free. And so this is what talaqa is all about, setting someone free. So when you divorce your wife, you set her free from the bonds of marriage. So he says, no, when I said anti taliq, you are taliq, I did not intend that you are divorced from the marriage contract. No, rather I meant you are freed from these fetters. So you don't have shackles on you and fetters on you. So this is what he says, this was my intention. Well, now the point is this, if the woman accepts this and she says, okay, fine, I accept that this was your intention, therefore I'm not divorced, well, in that case, then she's not divorced, and that's fair enough, they've resolved the issue by themselves. But what if the woman says, no, I'm not going to accept this from you, you said, anti taliq, you are divorced, therefore I am divorced from the marriage contract, meaning the official shar'i definition of divorce, when you are freed from the marriage contract. And so they have this dispute. The man says, no, I did not intend this. The woman says, don't talk to me about your intention. I heard your words, they are clear. That's it, matter is finished. So they take their matter to the court. What does the court decide? The court is going to take the side of the woman. And the reason for this is because this claim which the man is making goes against what is apparent from his words. What is apparent from his words is that anti taliq, you are divorced, means you are divorced from the marriage. So the point is that the qadi or the judge is going to have to go by what is apparent from the context in which the words were spoken. So what is apparent from the context is that he intended the divorce. So the man cannot say, I did not intend the divorce, meaning to say the official divorce. However, if they do not take the matter to court, then the woman has every right to believe what the man said, and so therefore they continue as husband and wife, and there's no problem. So you can see how the ruling can change between them resolving the matter themselves privately and them taking the matter to the court. So when the matter is taken to the court, then we do not look at your intentions, rather we look at what is apparent from the context in which the incident took place. What about this? He says to his wife, you are divorced. And so the wife says, okay then, I'm not your wife anymore. And he says, no, I did not mean that. I meant you are divorced from your previous marriage. Let's suppose that this wife had a previous marriage and the previous husband divorced her. So the new husband then says to her, you are divorced. And then he says, what I intended is that you are divorced from your last marriage. Which of course is true, that's why she's married to the new husband. So, what do we say about this? We say the same thing. If the woman believes him that this is what he in fact intended, then that's fair enough, they carry on as husband and wife. If the woman says, no, I will not accept this intention of yours, and so she takes him to the hakim, how will the hakim decide? He's going to rule in accordance with what is apparent from the context, and what is apparent is that this is an official shar'i divorce. And just as the divorce can be uttered verbally, it can also be written down. So a man can divorce his wife by writing down that he's divorcing his wife, and this would take place. So for example, he can send her a letter telling her that she's divorced. What about this scenario? A man comes to another man and he tells him, write a letter in which my wife is going to be divorced. So the husband tells another man to write a letter informing his wife that she is divorced. So in other words, he's not going to write the letter himself, he's going to appoint somebody else to write the letter of divorce. So the question now is the wife divorced from the moment this husband asks the other man to write the letter? Or is she divorced when the letter is actually written? Well, the answer is, if he's telling this man to write the letter of divorce because he wants some documentation for the divorce which previously occurred, so let's say on the first day he pronounces divorce to his wife, and then the second day he comes to the other man and he says, I want you to write this divorce down, well then the point is that in this case the divorce previously occurred. It occurred yesterday, to be precise. Whereas if the divorce did not previously occur, then we say that the divorce will occur after the letter has been written. So one might ask, well, what is the difference between him asking the man to write the divorce and the man actually writing the divorce? We say the difference is actually great, because if we say the divorce takes place when the husband asks the other one to write it down, then the husband has actually pronounced the divorce. But if we say that the divorce in fact takes place after the letter has been written, then this wakil, who is the person who is going to write down this divorce, he has to ask this husband, is your wife in the correct time period for which divorce is valid? For example, if he's going to write this letter down and the wife is in her menstruation, is it permissible for him to write this letter of divorce down? The answer clearly is no, because you're not allowed to divorce your wife in a period of menstruation. Of course, the wakil is not divorcing his wife, he's divorcing somebody else's wife, but the point is that a divorce in menstruation is haram, and you're not allowed to aid or help somebody in that which is haram. So therefore, the wakil would have to ask this man, okay, I'll write down the letter of divorce for you, but first you must inform me, is she in her proper period? Meaning to say, she must not be in a period of menstruation, she must not be in a period of purity in which you have had intercourse with her. And according to one opinion, which is the majority opinion, she must also not be in her postnatal bleeding, because they say that takes the same ruling as the hayd, which is the menstrual cycle, and we spoke about this issue before, of course. So the point is, only if she's in a proper period can this wakil write the letter of divorce, otherwise he would be helping this husband in sin and transgression, which you're not allowed to do. Not only that, but we say, in fact, it is good or recommended for the wakil to encourage this husband not to divorce the wife. He can give him advice. He can tell him, look, you're divorcing her because something she did or said, or perhaps an aspect of a character. But Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And if you hate them, meaning your wives, then perhaps it could be that you hate something and Allah brings much good about from it. Then the second type of divorce is when a man utters a word or words which can carry either meaning. It could carry the meaning of a divorce, and it can also carry the meaning of a non-divorce. So in cases like these, we would have to look at the intention of the man, as your deeds are by your intention. And what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says, that words are clothing of the meaning. So just as you wear clothes and they cover you, so words and meanings are two different things. Words are the clothing for the meaning. Just as your jacket or your thobe would be your clothing. And so what he says then is that clothing, and we're talking about physical clothing here, they differ, do they not, from custom to custom, culture to culture? And so because of this, a particular word of divorce could be taken to mean a clear-cut divorce in one country, but in another country where the customs and cultures are different, it could be taken to mean an ambiguous word which carries this meaning or that. So when we talk about clear-cut words of divorce and ambiguous words of divorce, then this is actually a relative issue. When it comes to many words, you could have a certain word which is taken to mean a clear-cut divorce in one country, but in a different country it is taken to mean an ambiguous word which may or may not mean divorce. And in this case, they would turn to the intentions of the husband to decide whether it is a divorce or not. So we could have certain ambiguous words. For example, if the man says to his wife, get out. What does he intend? Does he intend that you get out because you're not my wife anymore? Or does he intend just get out physically because I don't want to speak to you anymore? Or perhaps he might tell her, taste the punishment. What does he intend? Does he intend taste the punishment of me not wanting to talk to you and being away from you, or taste the punishment of divorce? So in other words, feel what divorce tastes like. What if he says to his wife, you are not my wife? And this is similar to what we discussed before. The man says, you are haram for me. And you'll remember we divided this up into 5 categories in accordance with his intention. But what if he tells his wife, wait in your waiting period? What appears from the case here is that this is definitely a clear case of divorce, because a wife cannot be waiting in her iddah period except after the divorce. So these words then would suggest to us, if it was taken to court, that this is a clear case of divorce, and we would have to judge in accordance with that he has divorced his wife, regardless of what he tells us about his intentions. And also another way to decide would be looking at the context. So if a man utters some words which are ambiguous, but it's in a context of an argument, let's say, or perhaps he is extremely angry, then here the judge has reasons to decide that this is in fact a divorce. Why is this? Because the context dictates so. Because here we have indications which tell us that what he intended was actually a divorce. Let us now move on to talking about when a husband gives a divorce and he makes an exception by saying except. As for example the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, Inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultanun illa man ittaba'aka min al-ghawin. Allah is saying to Shaitan, you do not have any control or authority over my slaves except those who follow you from the misguided ones. Similarly, when the Prophet ﷺ is talking about the sanctity of Mecca, and we're talking about the Haram area, he said that its trees and its plantation which grow naturally there are not allowed to be plucked out or cut off. And then his uncle Al-Abbas said, O Messenger of Allah, except the idkhir, which means lemongrass, because we need it for our graves and our houses. And so then the Prophet said, Illa al-idkhir, except the lemongrass. So again we see here that the Prophet made an exception to the general rule. So what happens here is that you give a general rule and then you make an exception from the generality. And so the one making the exception needs to be the same person who gives the general rule in the first place. And you'll remember we spoke about this idea of exception in our presentation on Usulul Fiqh. So if person A gives a general rule and person B then makes an exception, then this is not valid. For example, person A is married to 4 women and he says that all of my wives are divorced. So all 4 of his wives are divorced. And then person B says, except the first wife. So is this exception valid? The answer is no, because the exception came from another person. It did not come from the original speaker. Whereas if the original speaker says, all my wives are divorced except the first wife, then this exception is now valid. Can the exception be more than half? So for example, if the man has 4 wives and he says, all my wives are divorced except Fatima, Zainab and Hamida. So these are 3 wives out of the 4. So basically he's divorcing all 4 of his wives except 3. Now 3 is clearly more than half of 4. So from the scholars are those who say that if you're going to make an exception which is half or more, then this is an invalid exception, because it is not from the eloquence of the language that you make an exception which is half or more when it comes to dealing with numbers. And so because this is not from the eloquence of the language, the exception is invalid. But we agree, it's not from the eloquence of the language, but still, grammatically, there is no problem with it, even if it is not eloquent. So an exception of this type is valid, even though it is not from eloquent speech. But when it comes to those exceptions which are not number related, for example, where Allah tells Iblis that you don't have any authority over my slaves except those who follow you from the misguided ones, well, clearly this exception being made is much more than half of the slaves of Allah, because most of the people are in fact following Shaitan because they are upon misguidance. So here Allah is making an exception with something which is far more than a half of the total. But there is no problem with this, and this is in accordance with the eloquence of the language, because what we are dealing with here is not a number. The number of the slaves of Allah is not something which can be counted. There are far too many. So we're not dealing with a specific number here. We're not dealing with, let's say, 10 or 4 or 5. We're dealing with something which is uncountable. So in a case like this then, the exception can be made with a half or more. It's just that the difference is when it comes to a particular number you're talking about, can you make an exception of a half or a more? We say that the strong opinion is that you can, because it is in accordance with the Arabic language, although it is not very eloquent. You could tell somebody, I owe you £10 except £1, which would then mean that you owe him £9. But you wouldn't tell him, I owe you £10 except £7, because 7 is half or more of 10. So normally, when exceptions are made, they are made for things which are less than half if you are dealing with a specific number. So here's an issue then about divorce. A man says to his wife, you are divorced twice except once. Then going by the opinion that 2 divorces do actually count as 2 divorces, then if he was to say, you are divorced twice except once, then according to that opinion, she is divorced once. But then he can make an exception on the number of wives divorced, as opposed to the number of divorces given to one wife. So for example, he has, let's say, 4 wives, and he says, my wives are divorced. Now, if he intends in his heart that all 4 of his wives are divorced except Zainab, let's say, then the matter is in accordance with his intention that all of his wives are divorced except Zainab, even though he didn't utter these words. Because when he says, my wives are divorced, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of his wives are divorced. It could mean that most of his wives are in fact divorced. However, on the other hand, if he says, all 4 of my wives are divorced, so he gives the particular number of 4, and he has 4 wives of course, then if he intends in his heart, except Zainab, then this intention is of no use, because now he's uttered the specific number, which is 4, and hence his intentions count for nothing now. So notice the difference between the 2 scenarios. And the reason for the difference is because sometimes when you give a general word, it can be used to refer to something which is specific. So if he says, my wives are divorced, clearly this is general, it is am, it includes all 4 of his wives, but it can be used to refer to something which is more specific than that. So he could be referring to 3 of his wives as opposed to all 4. For example, in the Quran, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسُ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ. Those people that the other people said to them that the people have gathered together against you. But when we look at the background of this ayah, we find that a man called Abu Nu'aym told the Prophet ﷺ that Abu Sufyan, who was still a mushrik at that time, has gathered his army against you. So it's not like the whole of mankind has gathered against the Prophet. And when the ayah says that the people said to them, actually these people, which the word is talking about, and Nas, is actually referring to Abu Nu'aym. And he is just one person, he is not the people. So we find that the word is general, but it is used to refer to somebody much more specific. Does it make a difference whether he mentions the exception before the general rule or afterwards? So if he tells his wives, all 4 of you are divorced except Zainab, so this is clear enough. But what about if he says, except Zainab, all 4 of you are divorced? Is this allowed? We say yes, this is allowed, and it takes the same ruling. And we say one of the great rules to know about making exceptions is that this exception must come within the context of the same speech. So he's not allowed to say, for example, all 4 of you are divorced, and then one day later he says, oh, except Zainab. No, this does not work. In fact, all 4 of them are divorced from the moment he said that. But if he said, all 4 of you are divorced except Zainab, then this holds true that 3 of them are divorced and Zainab is not, because the exception came within the same context of the speech. So the point is, you're not allowed to have a gap between the general rule and the exception being made. And this gap must not be so long so as to make these 2 items of speech separate. It must be one whole item of speech. So the general rule and the exception must be one item of speech. If there is a gap, then this gap is in fact allowed according to the correct opinion, as long as the context of the speech is the same. And the evidence for this is quite clear. The hadith of the Prophet speaking about the sanctity of Mecca, where he says that you're not allowed to cut off its grass. And then the Prophet went on to speak a little bit more. Then at the end of it, Al-Abbas said, "O Messenger of Allah, accept the idkhir, because we need this for the houses and the graves." And then the Prophet said, "Accept idkhir." So no doubt there is a gap between the general rule and the exception. However, the context of the speech did not change. So as long as the context of the speech doesn't change and there is a gap, then this gap does not harm. And this is an issue we have discussed before in Usul al-Fiqh. Is it a condition that the speaker should have intended the exception before he makes the exception? The answer is no, and again we have the same evidence to prove it, the evidence of this hadith, when the Prophet said that the grass of Mecca is not to be cut. He certainly was not intending the idkhir, the lemongrass, until Al-Abbas mentioned it to him, and then the Prophet made the exception. We have another evidence with Sulaiman alayhi salam. He made an oath by Allah that he will have intercourse with all of his wives, and they will give birth to a fighter in the way of Allah. And then he was told to say, Insha'Allah, if Allah wills. Now the point is, if he had said Insha'Allah, then this would have been a valid exception that he has made. As it so happens, of course, he did not say Insha'Allah, and his request did not come true. But the shahid from the hadith is that Sulaiman alayhi salam was not intending to say Insha'Allah when he made this oath. So your intention to make this exception, if it newly arises after your general statement, then this is valid as long as it is within the context of the speech. And from the scholars are those who have said that he has to have made this intention for the exception before he makes the exception. Otherwise, the exception is incorrect. But of course, we have the evidence to disprove this opinion of theirs. What if the man says to his wife, "You are divorced yesterday"? Well, the point is that the divorce happens when you utter it. So this is impossible. How can she be divorced yesterday? Unless, of course, he is informing her that she was divorced yesterday. Well, in that case, we would have to look. Was she in fact divorced yesterday? Did he divorce her yesterday? If the answer is yes, then he is simply informing her of what took place yesterday. So no new divorce takes place. And if he did not in fact divorce her yesterday, then what he is saying is simply a lie. And again, a divorce does not take place. So both ways, a divorce does not take place. Because you cannot divorce somebody yesterday. You have to divorce them right here and now, or in the future. Of course, the man could say, "You were divorced 1 year ago." Of course, then a divorce does not take place. Like we said, a divorce cannot take place in the past. However, the man might say, "Yes, but I intended by this that you were divorced 1 year ago by your previous husband." Then yes, this is fine, this intention is okay. But nothing changes really. We still say that a divorce has not taken place. Meaning to say, any new divorce from him has not taken place. Although we would accept his intention that this is what he in fact intended, and there's no problem with that. But going the other way around, if the man says, "You are divorced" to his wife, and then the wife says, "Okay, I'm divorced," but then he regrets it and he said, "No, I meant you are divorced by your previous husband, which is why you married me." Then is this intention of his accepted or not? If the wife decides to accept it, then it's accepted, and they go on living as husband and wife. But if the wife says, "No, this intention of yours goes against what is apparent in this situation, and I don't accept that this is in fact your intention," and she takes him to court, then what is upon the qadi or the judge is to judge in accordance with what is apparent. And what is apparent here is that the man has actually divorced her. Otherwise, any old man can pronounce a divorce on his wife and then he regrets it, and then the matter gets taken to court and he'll just claim, no, I actually intended that she's divorced from a previous marriage. So you can use this hila to get away from the situation. The hila, of course, meaning a device or a stratagem or a trickery. So what we say is the obligation upon the judge is to judge in accordance with what is apparent. Sometimes you could have other indications. For example, the wife asks for a divorce and the man says, "You are divorced." And then he says, "No, my intention was you are divorced from a previous marriage." Here the situation is even clearer. We have a strong indication which tells us that no, this intention of his is invalid. Rather, what he intended was an actual divorce, because she asked for a divorce and he replied in this way. It can only mean that this is in fact an official divorce from him. So here we have a qarina, or an indication, or perhaps you could say circumstantial evidence, which helps us to decide the case. What about this situation? The husband tells his wife that before my friend Zayd arrives back from his journey, you are divorced 1 month before his arrival. So let us say, for example, that today is the 20th of Shawwal, and next month, of course, is Dhul Qa'dah. Now, if Zayd arrives on the 20th of Dhul Qa'dah, which is exactly 1 month afterwards, then we say that the wife was divorced on the 20th of Shawwal. But let's suppose if Zayd arrives, let's say, before the passing of a month, so he arrives on the 19th of Dhul Qa'dah, then the husband said you are divorced 1 month before Zayd arrives. So if Zayd arrives on the 19th of Dhul Qa'dah, this would mean that she was divorced on the 19th of Shawwal. But the problem with that is that the husband said this on the 20th of Shawwal. So this would in fact mean she was divorced yesterday. And what did we say about the divorce occurring yesterday? It simply doesn't happen, does it? So in a case like this, if Zayd arrives on the 19th, so he arrives in fact less than a month after he spoke these words, then she's not divorced. If he arrives after 1 month of the husband uttering these words, then the wife is divorced. So let's say, for example, if he says to his wife, you will be divorced 1 month before my friend Zayd arrives, and this utterance took place on the 20th of Shawwal, and Zayd arrives on the 25th of Dhul Qa'dah, then 1 month before 25th of Dhul Qa'dah would be 25th of Shawwal, so we say that the wife was divorced on the 25th of Shawwal. So this is when her iddah period would begin. But this leads us immediately on to the next question, which is if the husband says something of this sort, is he allowed to have intercourse with the wife? Remember, you're not allowed to divorce the wife in a period of purity in which you've had intercourse with her. We already mentioned this ruling. So because of this situation, we tell the husband, you are not allowed to have intercourse with your wife until Zayd arrives. Because let's say if he says on the 20th, you are divorced 1 month prior to Zayd arriving. And this is on the 20th. Now Zayd arrives on the 25th of Dhul Qa'dah. This would mean that she's divorced on the 25th of Shawwal. But now supposing if the husband had intercourse with her on the 25th of Shawwal, or even on the 24th of Shawwal, this would be him having intercourse with her in a period of purity. And a divorce in this case would be haram for him, because you only have to divorce your wife in a period of purity in which you have not had intercourse with her. So if he says something like this, then we would tell the husband immediately, you are not allowed to have intercourse with your wife if you make this condition, because then you risk divorcing her while she's not in the correct time period for you to divorce her. Similarly, if the husband says to his wife, you are divorced just before I die, he might be doing this to deprive the wife of the inheritance, so that he actually wants to keep her as a wife, but yet deprive her of the inheritance. So he wants to have his cake and eat it. Well, we say in a case like this, if he says this, then in fact at any moment in time it could be just before your death, because we don't know when you're going to die. And so this is the case that she could then potentially be divorced at any second now, because at any second now you could die. So therefore at any second now it could be just before your death. So in other words, there's a possibility that she could be divorced at any moment now. And because of this, we tell the husband, you are not allowed to have intercourse with the wife, simply because of the risk that you could be having intercourse with her and she could be divorced. And so you'd be divorcing her at a time in which you're not allowed to divorce her. Remember, you're not allowed to have intercourse with your wife in a period of purity, of course, and then immediately divorce her. That's impermissible, and that's not the correct time period for divorce. So we tell him that if you're going to say this, then you're not allowed to have intercourse with the wife, but despite that, you still have to spend money on her, because the asl, or the original ruling, is that she is still officially your wife. And because of this, you do have to spend on her, just like the husband has to spend on his wife. So if we take a look at this situation, then it's skewed against the husband if he says this. So on the one hand, he's not allowed to have intercourse with her, but on the other hand, he still has to spend on her as if she is his wife, because the asl is, or the official status is, that she is actually his wife. What about if the husband says, you are divorced if you fly? Meaning if the wife starts to fly just like a bird. Well, the point is that for a human being to fly like a bird does is impossible, so we say this divorce does not count. It is in fact just him mumbling any old rubbish. And likewise, if he hinges the divorce on anything which is impossible to occur, then we say the divorce does not occur. What about if we take the flip side of the coin? Something which is impossible not to happen. Then the ruling here is that she is divorced immediately. So in the previous example we said that the husband says to his wife, you are divorced if you fly. Of course that's impossible, so she is not divorced. Take the opposite end of the coin. He says to her, you are divorced if you do not fly. Now she is divorced immediately because we know that's impossible for her to fly. So definitely it will be the case that she will not fly, hence the divorce occurs immediately. So if we compare the two examples, we have two possibilities. Either she flies or she doesn't fly. There is no third option. Now, we have said that her flying is completely impossible, which necessitates therefore that her not flying is wajib to happen. And with wajib, what we mean is it is wajib to happen. For example, it is wajib for the sun to rise. It is wajib for the sun to set in the evening. This is wajib, it must happen. We don't intend by this a hukum taklifi. So when we have only two choices and both of them are contradictory, then one of them must take place and the other one must not take place. What about if the husband says, you are divorced if I do not ascend into the heavens? Well, we say you ascending into the heavens is impossible, so in this case then, she is immediately divorced. What about if the man says to his wife, you are divorced if tomorrow comes today? Well, let us ask ourselves, is it possible for tomorrow to come today? Of course it's impossible. Tomorrow and today are two contradictions, they cannot happen at the same time. You either have tomorrow or you have today, and one of them must be present. If one of them is present, the other one must not be present. So tomorrow and today are two contradictions. You cannot have them both at the same time, and neither can you not have them both at the same time. And this is the definition of a contradiction. So we say in a case like this then, that she is not divorced, because this is something which is impossible to happen. What about if he says to his wife, you will be divorced on Saturday, and Saturday has not arrived yet? So when exactly is she divorced? This is the question. Is she divorced at the beginning of Saturday, so immediately as Saturday enters? So this would be the Fajr time on Saturday, because that's when the daytime begins. Because before that it's night time, and he's not intending night time. When we talk about Saturday or any day, for that matter, we're normally talking about the daytime. So we'll carry it on this intention. But the point is, it will happen on the first instance of the Saturday. It will not happen at the end of Saturday. Likewise with the month, he tells his wife, you will be divorced in Shawwal. Now when in Shawwal? The first of Shawwal, or at the end, or in the middle? When? We say it will be right at the beginning of Shawwal. Because the point is, when the month or the day begins, then it holds true that we have entered that particular month or day. And that was a time he hinged the divorce on. But here we could have a potential argument. The man says, you will be divorced on Saturday. Now when Saturday comes, the woman says, okay, now I'm divorced at Fajr time. But the man says, no, what I intended was at the end of Saturday, not right at the beginning of Saturday. Well, the point is this, if the woman accepts his intention, then it's all well and good. If she doesn't accept his intention and she takes him to court because of it, then how will the judge decide? The judge will decide in accordance with what is apparent, and what is apparent is that she is divorced at the beginning of the day. So in other words, in this scenario, the judge will decide in accordance with the woman. But we ask, is it better for the woman to take the husband to court, or simply to accept his word for it, and accept his intention? If the husband is somebody of a sound character and deen, then she should take his word for it and accept his intention. If he is other than that, then she can take him to court. This would be the preferred choice. But sometimes you could have indications to suggest that his intention is in fact correct. And this is in fact what he intended. So for example, if he says, no, I intended actually at the end of the day, and the indication is that during midday some of my friends are coming and I have to prepare food for them. Now you know I cannot cook, and you're the only one who can cook, so I need you to prepare the food, and of course to prepare the food I need you to be present. So in a case like this we could have an indication to suggest that he did in fact intend the end of the day. So whenever we have court cases, we always have to look at the surrounding circumstances and the circumstantial evidence as well. And so the point is that these are a few issues pertaining to the divorce matters. Some of these issues which we have mentioned are rare, or perhaps they do not even occur at all, but the scholars do talk about issues like these, not because they have a particular practical benefit, but rather it is to train the student of knowledge to think in order to be able to develop the knack for issuing ruling. Okay, now let us take some review questions. So question number 1. We said that the kinaya of a divorce can be accepted, but one of 2 conditions must be met. Recall them. Question number 3. If a husband blurts out the divorce in a clear-cut sense, you are divorced, some scholars said that this also requires an intention because it is analogous to the laghw al-yamin, when a person takes an oath but does not actually intend it, it's just something running off the tongue. How does the opposition argue against this reasoning? Question number 3. If a man says to his wife, you are divorced 1 month before Zayd arrives. In a case like this, we said that the situation is skewed against the husband on 2 counts. Recall them.